In a chilly Brooklyn pharmacy, Rachel, a single mom, pleads for medicine to save her feverish baby Noah, only to face cold rejection. Then, Logan Matthews, a millionaire with secrets buried deep, steps in, his kindness sparking an unlikely bond. As their worlds collide, Noah's absent father resurfaces with threats, and Logan's powerful family pulls dangerous strings. Will their growing love conquer the odds? Hang on for a story that'll tug at your heartstrings. Where are you tuning in from? Drop your city and age in the comments. Let's connect. If this tale grabs you, hit subscribe and share it with friends. Trust me, you won't want to miss the surprises waiting ahead. The Brooklyn morning bit like a blade, its icy gusts slicing through Rachel Bennett's thin coat as she staggered toward the pharmacy's glass doors. Her arms trembled under the weight of her 15-month-old son Noah, whose feverish body radiated heat against her chest, a small furnace wrapped in a threadbare blanket. At 29, Rachel was no stranger to exhaustion. Double shifts at the diner, bills stacked like accusations on her kitchen counter, and nights spent rocking Noah through colic had carved deep lines beneath her eyes. But this was different. This was fear, raw and paralyzing, clawing at her throat as Noah's shallow breaths grew uneven, his skin flushed an alarming red. His fever had spiked to 104 degrees overnight, and the hospital's pediatrician was a week away. She had no one to turn to, no safety net, just a mother's desperate instinct driving her forward. The pharmacy's automatic doors hissed open, releasing a chime that barely registered in Rachel's fogged mind. Inside, the sterile glow of fluorescent lights clashed with the chaos in her heart. Her waitress uniform, yellowed white shirt, sleeves rolled up, black pants faded from too many washes, felt like a costume, ill-suited for the role she played now, a mother begging for a miracle. Noah whimpered, too weak to cry, his face pressed into her neck, and each soft sound was a dagger to her resolve. She crossed the store in a haze, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, ignoring the two customers chatting idly by the vitamin aisle. Their casual laughter felt like a foreign language, distant from the weight she carried. At the counter, a young clerk in a crisp white lab coat typed lazily at a computer, his badge reading, Mark. His indifference was a wall she'd faced before. Bureaucracy, rules, the kind of cold efficiency that crushed people like her. Rachel stopped, breathless, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Please," she said, the word cracking like thin ice. "My son's got a fever, 104. I need amoxicillin, the kids' version, the suspension. I'll pay by the end of the week, I swear." Her eyes, hollow and pleading, locked onto Mark's, willing him to see the urgency, to see Noah's sweat-drenched curls, his half-closed eyes. Mark looked up, his discomfort plain. His gaze flicked from Rachel's ragged appearance to Noah's pale face, then back to the screen, as if it held the script for this moment. He shifted, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he began, his tone flat, practiced. "Without a prescription and payment, I can't help you." The words landed like a slap, each syllable a door slamming shut. Rachel blinked, her mind struggling to process the refusal. "I'm not asking for charity," she said, her voice rising, fraying at the edges. "I get paid on Thursday. I'll leave my ID, anything. He's getting worse. Look at him." Mark glanced around, nervous, his eyes darting to the security cameras blinking overhead. "Ma'am, those are the rules. It's a controlled medication. I could lose my job." His words were a brick wall, unyielding. Rachel's desperation boiled over. "I have no one else," she shouted, her voice echoing in the quiet store. "The hospital said the pediatrician's gone till next week. He's been burning up since yesterday and it won't break." The outburst drew stares. An older man by the syrup shelf, pity in his eyes. A woman at the checkout, clutching her purse as if Noah's fever might leap across the room. Rachel's face burned, not just with anger, but with the sharp sting of shame. She stepped back, clutching Noah tighter, as if shielding him from the world's judgment. "I'm sorry," she murmured, defeated, her voice barely a whisper. "It's my fault." The tears she'd held back spilled over, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. She turned toward the doors, each step heavier than the last, her mind a storm of rage. Not at Mark, not at the pharmacy, but at a life that left her so utterly alone. Noah's weak cough broke her heart anew, and she adjusted the blanket, whispering useless comforts to him, to herself. Before she reached the exit, a voice cut through the air, firm and deep, like a blade slicing through fog. "What's going on here?" Rachel froze, her breath catching. The voice came from behind, commanding yet calm, carrying an authority that silenced the room. She turned slowly, instinctively, shielding Noah. First, she saw polished black shoes, gleaming under the lights. Then, a dark wool overcoat, tailored to perfection. Finally, a face, sharp jawline, gray eyes like a winter sky, studying her with an intensity that felt both unsettling and safe. Logan Matthews, though she didn't know his name yet, stood like a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere, his presence a stark contrast to the pharmacy's mundane hum. "Nothing," Rachel said quickly, eyes dropping to the floor. "I'm sorry, I'm leaving." Her voice trembled, but Logan didn't move. His gaze lingered, taking in her dark circles, Noah's fevered brow, the way her hands shook not just from cold, but from a fear she couldn't hide. "He's burning up," he said, stepping closer, his tone softer now, but no less certain. "Let me see him." Rachel hesitated, her instincts screaming to protect her son, but something in Logan's voice, steady, unpatronizing, made her pause. Who was this man, and why did he care? Rachel stood rooted in the pharmacy's sterile light, Noah's feverish weight anchoring her as Logan Matthews' words hung in the air. "Let me see him." Her heart thudded, caught between distrust and a desperate need for help. Who was this man with his polished shoes and commanding calm to step into her nightmare? Yet his gray eyes held no pity, only a quiet resolve that disarmed her. Hesitantly, she pulled back Noah's blanket, revealing his flushed cheeks and damp curls. Logan leaned in, his hand brushing Noah's forehead with a gentleness that belied his imposing presence. "At least 104, he murmured, his voice low, clinical. "What have you given him?" "Acetaminophen," Rachel replied, her voice barely steady. "It worked yesterday, but it spiked again last night. He vomited this morning. I couldn't afford more." The admission burned, a reminder of her fragility. Logan's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to the clerk, Mark, who hovered nervously behind the counter. "Why isn't she getting the medication?" His tone was razor-sharp, cutting through the room's tension. Mark stammered. "Mr. Matthews, no prescription, and she couldn't pay." Logan's eyes narrowed, and the air seemed to thicken. "This is my business," he said, each word deliberate. "If someone's sick, your protocol is the problem, not the solution." He pulled a phone from his coat, dialing without hesitation. "Dr. Harris, pharmacy on 5th, now." The call was brief, authoritative, leaving no room for doubt. Rachel watched, dazed, as Logan transformed the pharmacy's back room into a sanctuary. A staff member scurried in with cold towels, a digital thermometer, and a bottle of water, while a portable heater hummed to life, chasing away the Brooklyn chill. Logan directed it all with near-military precision, yet his glances at Noah carried a softness Rachel couldn't place. She sank into a worn armchair, Noah in her lap, his whimpers quieter now, as if he sensed the shift. Her mind raced, gratitude warred with suspicion. Men like this didn't help for nothing. Her ex, Daniel, had taught her that, his promises crumbling the moment Noah was born. Dr. Harris arrived, an older man with gray hair and steady hands, his calm voice a balm. Logan briefed him succinctly. High fever since yesterday, vomiting this morning, dehydrated. Harris nodded, examining Noah with practiced efficiency. Throat, ears, lungs. Rachel answered his questions mechanically, her eyes flicking to Logan, who stood by the door, arms crossed, watching like a sentinel. The diagnosis came swiftly: a viral infection with potential bacterial complications. Harris administered a liquid antibiotic, his instructions clear: rest, fluids, follow up tomorrow. Noah's breathing eased, and Rachel exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. As Harris packed his bag, Logan spoke, his voice softer. He was my goddaughter's pediatrician. The detail was small, unguarded, but it struck Rachel. Why share that? She nodded, unsure how to respond, her mind still spinning. Harris left with a promise to call, and Logan turned to her. Did you come alone? Subway, after my shift, she said, adjusting Noah's blanket. My roommate checked his temperature before I left. There's no one else. The truth felt like a confession, exposing her isolation. Logan's next question was careful, almost too precise. And his father? Rachel swallowed, the question a knife to an old wound. Gone, she said simply, her voice flat. Not in our lives. Logan nodded, his eyes darkening with something unspoken. Anger, perhaps, or recognition. Silence settled, heavy but not uncomfortable, like the pause before a storm. I don't know why you're doing this, Rachel said finally, her voice raw. But thank you. Logan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. No one should have to beg to save their child, he said, the words carrying a weight she couldn't yet decipher. He stepped back, giving her space. I'll let you rest. Rachel sat, stroking Noah's hair, the room's warmth a stark contrast to the cold world outside. Logan's presence lingered in her thoughts, a puzzle she couldn't solve. He wasn't like the others, those who offered help with strings attached, their kindness a debt to be repaid. Yet her scars whispered caution. Trust was a luxury she'd long abandoned, burned away by broken promises and empty hands. Noah stirred, his fever cooling, and for the first time in hours, she felt a flicker of hope, fragile as a candle in the wind. As she prepared to leave, Logan reappeared, his coat draped over his arm. Rachel, he said, her name soft on his lips. Do you have plans for tomorrow? The question caught her off guard, its casual tone at odds with the intensity in his eyes. She stared, her heart tripping over itself. Why? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Logan smiled, a fleeting, almost shy curve of his lips. Because I'd like to check on him, he nodded toward Noah, now sleeping soundly. Rachel didn't answer, her mind a tangle of fear and curiosity. She thanked him again, stepping into the cold, Noah's warmth her only anchor. As the pharmacy doors closed behind her, Logan's question echoed, a thread pulling her towards something she wasn't ready to name. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of trapped flies, casting a harsh glow over the chipped formica tables and the air thick with grease. Rachel Bennett moved through the chaos, her apron stained with coffee and ketchup, a crumpled notepad in her hand. Her feet ached in cheap flats, each step a reminder of the double shift stretching ahead. Noah was home with her roommate, his fever finally broken, but Logan Matthews' parting words from the pharmacy clung to her like a half-remembered dream. Do you have plans for tomorrow? The question had stirred something dangerous. Hope, perhaps, or curiosity. And Rachel shoved it down, focusing on the clatter of plates and the cook's shouted orders. Trust was a trap she'd fallen into before, and she wouldn't let a stranger's kindness unravel her defenses. The bell above the door jingled, sharp and out of place in the diner's rhythm. Rachel glanced up and her breath caught. Logan Matthews stood in the doorway, his dark suit pristine against the backdrop of cracked vinyl booths. His hair, slightly tousled by the evening breeze, softened the sharp lines of his face, but his gray eyes scanned the room with a quiet intensity that made her pulse skip. He didn't belong here, not in this world of greasy spoons and tired waitresses. Yet he crossed the floor with a confidence that turned heads. Rachel tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, suddenly conscious of her stained apron and the sweat on her brow. He slid onto a stool at the counter, right in front of her station. "Evening," he said, his voice low, almost drowned by the sizzle of the grill. "How's Noah?" The question was simple, but the genuine concern in his tone disarmed her. Rachel busied herself with a clean mug, avoiding his gaze. "Better," she said. "Sleeping through the night for the first time in days." Logan's shoulders relaxed, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Good. That's good." "Coffee?" she asked, needing to fill the silence. He nodded. "Only if you're pouring." The reply caught her off guard, and she laughed, a small, surprised sound that felt foreign in her throat. As she poured the steaming brew, Logan watched, not with the invasive stare she was used to from late-night customers, but with a curiosity that felt both gentle and unnerving. She slid the mug across the counter, the rich aroma cutting through the diner's staleness. "You make a mean coffee," he said after a sip, leaning forward. "Strong. No nonsense, like you." Rachel raised an eyebrow, heat creeping up her cheeks. "And you? Always this charming with strangers?" She meant it as a deflection, but his smile widened, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "Only when they're worth it," he said, and the words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through her defenses. She turned away, wiping the counter to hide her flustered expression, her mind racing. Men like Logan didn't come to places like this for coffee. Or did they? The bell rang again, shattering the moment. A tall man in a tailored blazer burst through the door, his Rolex glinting as he spread his arms wide. "Logan Matthews!" he boomed, his voice carrying over the diner's hum. "You vanished, man!" Rachel froze, her cloth still in hand, as the man, Andrew, she'd later learn, strode to the counter. Logan stood, his posture stiffening, and the two clasped hands briefly, a familiarity tinged with restraint. "Andrew," Logan said, his tone clipped. "Been a while." "Too long," Andrew laughed, clapping Logan's shoulder. He turned to Rachel, his grin too wide, too knowing. "He tell you who he is yet?" Rachel frowned, her stomach twisting. "What do you mean?" Andrew's laugh grew louder, oblivious to Logan's tightening jaw. "This guy's the heir to Matthews Pharmaceuticals, one of New York's biggest empires. His dad's name is on half the buildings in Manhattan. Logan here could be running it all, if he wasn't so damn stubborn." The words hit Rachel like a cold wave. She stared at Logan, her mind scrambling to reconcile the man who'd knelt beside Noah with this revelation. Heir to an empire? She'd been naive, blind to the wealth behind his polished exterior. Logan looked down, his discomfort palpable, but he didn't deny it. Andrew rambled on about a party, urging Logan to show up, then left as abruptly as he'd arrived, his laughter echoing in the sudden silence. Rachel's hands trembled as she gripped the counter. "You didn't say," she said, her voice low, accusatory. Logan sighed, sitting back down, his eyes meeting hers. "I don't lead with it," he said quietly. "People change when they know. They expect things, or they pull away." His honesty was raw, unguarded, but Rachel's scars ran deep. "Why are you here, Logan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Really?" He leaned closer, his gaze steady. "Because when I saw you with Noah fighting for him, I felt something I haven't in years. Something real." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Rachel wasn't ready to unpack. She stepped back, clutching her cloth like a shield, her heart pounding. As Logan paid for his coffee and left, his parting glance was a challenge. To see him, not the empire he'd rejected. Alone in the diner's harsh light, Rachel wondered if she could. The air in Rachel Bennett's cramped apartment was thick with the scent of instant coffee and the faint mildew that clung to the walls. She sat on the edge of her sagging couch, Noah babbling on a worn rug at her feet, stacking colorful blocks with unsteady hands. His fever was gone, his cheeks rosy with life again, but Rachel's chest was tight, her mind still reeling from the diner. Logan Matthews wasn't just a kind stranger. He was heir to an empire, a man whose world of penthouses and power was as foreign to her as the moon. His words, something real, echoed in her head, both a lure and a warning. She'd learned the hard way that kindness often came with a price, and Daniel's betrayal, his disappearance when Noah was born, had left scars that throbbed at the thought of trust. A sharp knock at the door jolted her. She frowned, expecting no one. Scooping Noah into her arms, she crossed the room, her pulse quickening. The mail slot rattled, and a plain brown envelope slid onto the floor, its edges crisp, ominous. No sender, no stamp, just her name scrawled in black ink. She hesitated, a chill snaking down her spine, then tore it open. The letter inside was typed, formal, each word a blade. Daniel, Noah's father, wanted to meet his son. He claimed readiness to take responsibility, citing financial stability and proper housing. The final line was a veiled threat. My legal team is prepared to ensure Noah's best interests. Rachel's breath hitched, the paper trembling in her hands. Daniel, who'd left her alone in a hospital room, was back, armed with lawyers and lies. She sank to the floor, clutching Noah, who sensed her distress and nuzzled closer. The room spun, memories of Daniel's empty promises crashing over her like a tide. He'd never wanted Noah, never called, never cared. This wasn't about love, it was control, a power play to rip away the one thing that kept her fighting. Her savings were a pittance, her life a patchwork of diner shifts and secondhand clothes. How could she fight a man with resources? Panic clawed at her, but a flicker of defiance sparked. She wouldn't lose Noah. Not now, not ever. Her fingers found her phone, and almost instinctively, she dialed Logan. His voice answered on the second ring, steady, grounding. Rachel, what's wrong? The tremor in her voice was enough. I'm coming, he said, no questions asked. Minutes later, he was at her door, his dark coat dusted with city grit, his gray eyes scanning her face with an intensity that steadied her. She handed him the letter without a word, watching as he read, his jaw tightening with each line. He wants to take Noah, she said, her voice breaking. He's got lawyers, money. I've got nothing. Logan folded the letter, his movements deliberate, controlled. You've got me, he said, kneeling to meet her eyes. He's not taking your son, I promise you that. The conviction in his voice was a lifeline, but Rachel's scars ran deep. Why are you doing this? She asked, searching his face. You barely know us. Logan's gaze softened, but a shadow crossed his features. Because I've seen what happens when no one steps up, he said, his voice rough. I won't let that happen to you. He stood, pulling out his phone. Mark Callahan, he said into it. Family law, best you've got. My place, tomorrow. The call was brief, decisive, and Rachel watched, caught between awe and unease. Logan was a force, but his wealth, his ease with power, reminded her how vast the gap between them was. Yet as he sat beside her, watching Noah knock over his blocks with a delighted giggle, something shifted. Logan laughed, a low, genuine sound, and handed Noah a block, his hands careful, almost reverent. The sight softened the edges of her fear, if only for a moment. They talked late into the night, the city's hum filtering through the thin walls. Logan asked about Noah's first words, her diner regulars, small things that made her feel seen, not judged. She asked about his work, and he spoke vaguely of pharmacies and investments, deflecting with a skill that hinted at secrets. A phone call interrupted them. Logan stepping into the hall to answer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "No, I'm not coming back," she caught, the words laced with bitterness. "Tell her it's done," he returned, his face composed, but his eyes carried a weight Rachel recognized, loneliness, cloaked in strength. As he left, he paused at the door. "We'll fight this, Rachel," he said, his voice firm. "Together." She nodded, Noah asleep in her arms, but the letter's threat loomed like a storm cloud. Logan's promise was a beacon, but doubt gnawed at her. Could she trust a man whose world was so far from hers? And what did he carry that made his voice break in the dark? The dim glow of a single bulb cast jagged shadows across Rachel Bennett's tiny living room, where papers littered the coffee table. Pay stubs, medical records, a neighbor's affidavit, all armor for the fight to keep Noah. She sat cross-legged on the floor, Noah asleep in his crib, his soft breaths a fragile rhythm against the city's restless hum. The letter from Daniel, Noah's absent father, lay like a venomous snake among the documents, its threat of lawyers and custody battles coiling tighter around her heart. Logan Matthews' promise, "We'll fight this together," had anchored her last night, but doubt gnawed at her. His wealth, his ease with power, felt like a foreign language she couldn't speak. Yet his laughter with Noah, the way his eyes softened, had cracked her defenses, leaving her teetering between trust and fear. Logan arrived as the sky bruised purple, his knock sharp but measured. He stepped inside, his dark coat shedding the chill of Brooklyn streets, his gray eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "You're ready for Callahan?" he asked, nodding at the papers. Rachel managed a tight nod, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. Mark Callahan, the lawyer Logan had summoned, was due at his Manhattan office in an hour, a beacon of hope she barely dared to trust. Logan crouched beside her, picking up a photo of Noah giggling in a park swing. "He's got your fight," he said, a faint smile breaking through his intensity. The words warmed her, but the weight of Daniel's letter pressed heavier. At Callahan's office, a sleek space of glass and steel, Rachel felt like an intruder, her worn sneakers out of place on the polished floor. Callahan, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a quiet authority, reviewed their evidence with surgical precision. Logan sat beside her, his presence steady but charged, as if braced for a storm. The lawyer's questions were methodical, Rachel's work hours, Noah's daycare, Daniel's absence, but each answer felt like bearing her soul. She spoke of late-night fevers, of scraping by, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. Logan listened, his silence a shield, but his hand brushed hers once, a fleeting anchor. Callahan stepped out to take a call, leaving them in the office's sterile quiet. Rachel glanced at Logan, his jaw tight, his gaze distant. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. He blinked, as if startled, then offered a half smile. "Just thinking," he said, but the shadow in his eyes told her it was more. Before she could press, Callahan returned, his expression grim. "Logan, we need to talk," he said, his tone like a blade slicing through the room's calm. Rachel's stomach twisted as Logan leaned forward, his posture rigid. "What is it?" Callahan didn't hesitate. His words were precise, devastating. "Daniel's legal action isn't his own. He's got no resources. The funding traces back to one of your father's holdings, Richard Matthews. The lawyers he's using? Recommended by a family associate." The air thickened, heavy with betrayal. Logan's face hardened, his fists clenching on the table. You're saying my father's behind this? His voice was low, a growl barely contained. Callahan nodded. It's a move to pull you back, Logan. You walked away from the empire, the inheritance. This is leverage, using Rachel and Noah to force your hand. Rachel's breath caught, her mind reeling. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't known existed. Her son's future, a bargaining chip for a man she'd never met. Logan stood, pacing like a caged animal, his anger a palpable force. He's using a child, he said, his voice breaking with disgust. A mother's pain to get to me. Rachel's fear surged, but so did her resolve. What does he want? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Callahan glanced at Logan, then her. Control. Logan's defiance threatens the Matthews legacy. This is a message. Logan turned, his eyes burning with a fury Rachel hadn't seen. This changes everything, he said, his voice low, resolute. He looked at her, the anger softening into something fiercer, protection. Rachel, I won't let him touch you or Noah. The promise was a vow, but it stirred her unease. How deep did this family's power run? And what scars did Logan carry from it? That night, back in her apartment, they sat on the floor, Noah's blocks scattered between them. Logan stacked them absently. His laughter at Noah's clumsy grabs a stark contrast to the fire in his eyes hours earlier. Rachel watched, her heart caught in a tug of war. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is your family's war, not mine. Logan's hand stilled, his gaze locking onto hers. It's our war now, he said, the words raw, unguarded. Because you and Noah, you're what matters. The moment hung, electric, their breaths sinking in the quiet. Rachel's hand grazed his, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the warmth of his touch. Noah's yawn broke the spell, and Logan smiled, but the air held a new weight. As he left, his parting glance was a silent pledge. Rachel stood at her window, the city's lights blurring through her tears. The fight was no longer just for Noah. It was for the fragile hope blooming between them, and the shadow of Richard Matthews loomed larger than ever. The gray stone steps of the Brooklyn family court loomed like a fortress under a sky heavy with clouds, each one a weight pressing on Rachel Bennett's chest. She stood frozen, Noah nestled in her arms, his light blue blanket a shield against the damp chill. At 15 months, he was oblivious to the battle about to unfold, his soft breaths a quiet rhythm that steadied her racing pulse. Beside her, Logan Matthews gripped her hand, his dark suit impeccable, but his gray eyes fierce with resolve. The revelation of his father's manipulation, funding Daniel's custody fight to control him, had turned their fight personal. A war not just for Noah, but for the fragile hope they'd built. Whatever happens, Logan murmured, his voice a low anchor. We face it together, Rachel nodded, her throat tight, unable to voice the storm of fear and gratitude swirling within her. Inside, the courthouse was a maze of cold marble and echoing footsteps, the air thick with the urgency of whispered arguments and rustling papers. Rachel's worn coat felt like a flimsy disguise among the suited lawyers and stern-faced clerks. Mark Callahan, Logan's lawyer, waited near the courtroom doors, his sharp eyes scanning a folder of evidence. Rachel's pay stubs, Noah's medical records, and testimonies from her diner regulars. His nod was curt, professional, but it steadied her. Across the lobby, Daniel appeared, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the man who'd abandoned her in a hospital room. His smile was polished, rehearsed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Behind him stood Richard Matthews, Logan's father, tall and imposing, his gaze a blade of ice. Rachel's breath hitched at the sight of him, his tailored elegance masking a cruelty she felt in her bones. The courtroom was austere, its wooden benches worn by countless stories of broken families. The judge, a black woman with a commanding presence, took her seat, her eyes sweeping the room with a clarity that missed nothing. Rachel sat beside Logan, Noah in her lap, his warmth her only tether, as Callahan began. His presentation was meticulous. Daniel's 2-year absence, Rachel's relentless care, every fever, every late-night shift, every scraped-together dollar laid bare. Each piece was a brick in her defense. But Rachel's hands trembled, her jaw tight as she watched Daniel's lawyer spin a tale of remorse and newfound stability. Daniel took the stand, his voice smooth, claiming he'd been lost, but was now ready to be a father. The lie burned in Rachel's chest, her fingers curling into fists. The judge called Logan next, and he rose, crossing the room with a stride that was neither arrogant nor hesitant. He stood not as the heir to an empire, but as a man stripped bare by loss and choice. "Mr. Matthews," the judge began, her tone measured, "why are you so involved in this case?" Logan's gaze found Rachel, then Noah, who stirred in her arms, unaware of the stakes. His voice, when he spoke, was steady but threaded with emotion. "I'm here because I know what it's like to lose someone you'd die for," he said. "My sister's son, my nephew, he was like my own. When he got sick, I couldn't save him. I swore I'd never stand by again." He paused, his eyes locking on the judge. "Rachel fights for Noah every day alone, with nothing but her will. I've seen her strength, her love. That's a mother. Daniel walked away, and now he's here, backed by my father's money, to use a child as a pawn." The room stilled, the weight of his words sinking in. "I'm here because Noah and Rachel are my family now. Not by blood, but by choice. I'll fight for them, no matter the cost." Richard Matthews stood abruptly, his voice cutting through the silence. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Callahan objected, but the judge, intrigued, allowed it. Richard's tone was smooth, venom cloaked in calm. "My son is misguided, throwing away a legacy for a fleeting cause. This isn't about family, it's rebellion." Logan turned, his eyes cold, the air crackling between them. "What I'm rejecting," he said, his voice ringing clear, "is an empire built on blackmail and control. You've tried to own me since Mom died, but it ends here." The words were a blade, severing years of silent battles, and Rachel's heart swelled with awe and fear at his raw defiance. The judge called a recess, her pen scratching notes as she left. Rachel trembled, Logan's arm around her a steadying force. The minutes stretched like hours, each tick of the clock a pulse in her veins. When the judge returned, her ruling was swift. Custody remains with Rachel Bennett. The father's request is denied. Rachel choked back a sob, hugging Noah as relief crashed over her. Daniel slipped out, a shadow fading. Richard adjusted his jacket, his face a mask, but his eyes burned with defeat. Outside, the air was sharp, the city's gray light softer now. Logan's hand found hers, their silence heavy with victory and unspoken promises. The fight had forged something unbreakable, but the war wasn't over, not with Richard's shadow lingering. Rachel adjusted Noah's blanket, her heart daring to hope for what came next. The Brooklyn air was sharp with the promise of rain, the city's gray light softening as Rachel Bennett and Logan Matthews stepped from the courthouse, their hands entwined, Noah's weight warm in Rachel's arms. The judge's ruling, custody secured, Daniel's claim denied, echoed in her chest like a heartbeat, a victory carved from fear and fight. Yet the shadow of Richard Matthews, his icy gaze lingering as he'd adjusted his jacket and vanished, clung like damp mist. Rachel's relief was tempered by the knowledge that power like his didn't fade quietly. Logan's grip tightened, his gray eyes scanning her face, reading the unspoken worry. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low, a vow woven into the words. Rachel wanted to believe him, but her scars whispered caution, even as her heart leaned toward the man who'd crossed worlds to stand by her. They walked in silence, the city's pulse, honking cabs, distant sirens, a familiar hum that felt new, as if the world had shifted beneath their feet. Noah stirred, his tiny hand clutching Rachel's coat, and she adjusted his blanket, her fingers brushing Logan's. The gesture was small, but it sparked a warmth that rivaled the chill. She glanced at him, his profile sharp against the overcast sky, and saw not the heir to an empire, but the man who'd knelt beside her son, who'd faced his father's venom to protect them. The courtroom had stripped them bare, Logan's defiance, her quiet strength, and what remained was something raw, unspoken, teetering on the edge of possibility. Logan stopped at a street corner, the wind tugging at his coat. "Rachel," he said, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "I meant what I said in there. You and Noah, you're my family." The words landed like a stone in her heart, stirring ripples of fear and hope. She'd built walls against promises, each one cracked by Daniel's lies, by a life that punished trust. But Logan's eyes, steady and unguarded, held no deception. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above the city's din. "For us?" He stepped closer, his hand lifting to brush a strand of hair from her face, the touch electric in its gentleness. "It means I want to build something real," he said. "A life, not just a moment. If you'll let me." The vulnerability in his voice, so at odds with his commanding presence, undid her. She searched his face, seeing the man who'd laughed with Noah over blocks, who'd turned a pharmacy into a haven, who'd stood against his father's empire for her. Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes, not from fear, but from the weight of daring to hope. Noah's soft coo broke the moment, his tiny hand reaching for Logan's coat. Logan chuckled, catching the boy's fingers, his smile a beacon in the gray. "What do you say, Noah?" he asked, his voice light, but his eyes still on Rachel. "Should we take your mom to the park?" Rachel laughed, the sound freeing, like a knot loosening in her chest. "A picnic?" she asked, echoing his question from days ago, the memory now a bridge between them. Logan nodded, his gaze steady. "Just us. A start." The next afternoon, Central Park was a tapestry of gold and green, the late sun filtering through ancient trees. Rachel spread a checkered blanket on the grass, Noah giggling as he chased a fallen leaf, his energy a miracle after weeks of fever. Logan sat beside her, his suit traded for a sweater, his ease with Noah, tossing a soft ball, mimicking the boy's delighted squeals, painting a picture of a life she'd never dared dream. They ate sandwiches, the simplicity of it grounding, and talked of small things. Noah's love for apples, Rachel's diner stories, Logan's quiet admission that he'd always wanted a dog. Each word wove them closer, a fragile thread in a world that had tried to tear them apart. As Noah dozed on the blanket, Rachel turned to Logan, the park's quiet, wrapping them in intimacy. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice low. "Not just of Daniel, but of you, of trusting again." Logan's hand found hers, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "I know," he said. "And I'm not them. I'm here, Rachel, for as long as you'll have me." The promise was a whisper, but it carried the weight of the courtroom, of every moment he'd chosen her. She leaned closer, their breaths mingling, the world fading to the rustle of leaves and Noah's soft snores. Their lips brushed, a tentative spark, but Noah's sleepy stir pulled them apart, both laughing softly, the moment unbroken. Under the vast park sky, Rachel felt the stir of something new, not an end, but a beginning, fragile yet fierce. Richard's shadow lingered, a distant storm, but for now, they had this, a blanket, a boy, and a love daring to grow. As they packed up, Logan's hand in hers, Rachel knew the road ahead would test them. But for the first time, she wasn't walking it alone. What a journey Rachel, Logan, and Noah took us on. A story of love, courage, and unbreakable bonds. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Did their fight move you? What moment hit you hardest? Drop your name, where you're from, and a score from 0 to 10 in the comments. Let's share the feels. A huge thank you for joining us today. Your support means the world. If this tale warmed your heart, hit subscribe and share it with someone special. Stay tuned for more stories that'll tug at your soul. See you next time.